They say a man can outrun his past if he rides hard enough, but no one ever tells you what happens when the past rides back faster. The wind moved low across the dry earth, carrying dust in thin lines that traced the edges of a fresh grave, and Ethan Cole stood over it with a shovel still in his hands, his shadow stretching long in the fading light like it didn't quite belong to him anymore. He had finished the job alone, just before sundown, carving the ground with steady strokes, not because he owed the man beneath the soil anything, but because leaving him there, unburied, felt like something worse than hate. The town had turned its back hours ago, doors closing one by one when the body was found just beyond the cattle trail. A stranger, they said, a drifter, no name, no kin, nothing worth the trouble. Ethan had recognized him the moment he saw the face, though time had worn it down like river stone. The scar along the jaw was still there, faint but unmistakable, and the memory came back the same way the wind did out here, slow at first, then all at once. He didn't say a word when he lifted the body, didn't call for help, didn't look toward the town again. Some things a man finishes on his own. The ground was hard, baked from weeks without rain, and every inch he dug felt like breaking through something buried deeper than dirt. He worked through the heat, through the silence, through the weight of knowing exactly who he was putting into the earth. When it was done, he marked the grave with a simple wooden cross, nothing carved but a line to show it wasn't forgotten. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the one thing he had taken before the burial, a small pendant tied to a strip of worn leather, the stone a deep turquoise that caught the last of the sun in a quiet, steady glow. It didn't belong to a drifter. It didn't belong to a man like him. He turned it once between his fingers, feeling the smooth edge, the years it must have seen, and for a moment, just a moment, something didn't sit right. He closed his hand around it anyway. The sky darkened slow, turning from gold to gray, and Ethan made his way back to the porch of his ranch house, boots heavy with dust, the kind that never really came off no matter how hard you tried. He sat there long after the light faded, elbows on his knees, hat low, listening to the quiet stretch across the land. No coyotes, no wind strong enough to carry sound. Just stillness. That was how he had lived these past 12 years. Quiet. Out of reach. Out of memory. Or so he thought. Somewhere past midnight, the air shifted, just enough to wake a man who had learned to trust small changes more than loud ones. Ethan didn't move right away. He listened. Nothing at first. Then, far off, a sound too measured to be the wind. Hoofbeats. One. Then another. Slow. Distant. He straightened slightly, eyes narrowing into the dark where the land met the sky. Riders didn't come out this way without reason. Not anymore. The sound faded, then returned, stronger this time, closer, like whoever it was had no intention of turning back. Ethan stood, slow and deliberate, the boards of the porch creaking under his weight, and he stepped down into the dust, his boots settling into the ground as if they had always belonged there. He didn't reach for his rifle. Not yet. The rhythm of the hooves grew steadier, more defined, until it wasn't just one rider anymore. It was many, enough to fill the silence with something heavier than sound. Ethan's gaze drifted, almost without meaning to, back toward the shallow rise where the grave lay under fresh dirt. The wind picked up just enough to lift a thin veil of dust across the wooden cross, and for a second, it looked like the earth itself was trying to breathe. He didn't believe in signs. Never had. But standing there in the gray edge of night, with something approaching that he couldn't yet see, he felt it anyway. That quiet shift inside a man when he realizes the past he buried didn't stay in the ground. And then he heard it clearly, not distant now, not uncertain. Hooves, many of them, coming straight for him. The sound did not rush in all at once. It gathered, like a storm that knew exactly where it was going. Each hoofbeat steady, deliberate, closing the distance with a kind of patience that made a man think twice about every choice he had made before this moment. Ethan Cole stood still in the open yard, the dust settling around his boots, his eyes fixed on the dark line of the horizon where the shapes were beginning to form, not yet clear, not yet close enough to count, but real enough to feel in his chest. He had heard riders before in his life, plenty of them, but this was different. These were not men passing through. These were not traders or wanderers looking for water. They moved as one, held together by something stronger than chance, something organized, something that did not need to announce itself. Ethan let out a slow breath, the kind a man takes when he already knows there is no use stepping away. He did not go for his rifle leaning against the porch. He did not step back into the house. Instead, he took one step forward, then another, until he was standing out in the open, where anyone approaching could see him clear as day. The pendant was still in his hand, though he did not remember pulling it out again. The turquoise stone caught the faint gray of the coming dawn, and for a moment, it looked almost alive, like it held a story he had not been told yet. The riders came into view one by one, shapes turning into figures, figures into men and women mounted on strong horses that carried them without hesitation. 5 riders at first, then 10, then more behind them, stretching wider across the land than he had expected. They did not spread out to surround him. They did not rush forward. They came straight, slow, and silent, as if time itself had bent to let them arrive exactly when they meant to. Ethan counted without meaning to. 12, 20, 30. He stopped counting when he realized the number did not matter. It was not about how many. It was about why. The first rider reached the edge of his property line just as the sun began to rise, a thin line of light cutting across the land and turning the dust into gold for a brief second before settling into something colder. The horse stopped without being pulled, as if it understood the boundary on its own. The rider did not move right away. Neither did Ethan. The distance between them held, about 20 yards, enough space for a man to think, not enough to feel safe. More riders filled in behind, forming a quiet line that stretched across the yard, their presence heavy but controlled, like they had no need to prove anything to anyone standing there alone. No one reached for a weapon. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft shift of leather and the slow breathing of horses that had traveled far without complaint. Ethan's gaze moved across them, taking in the details without staring, the way he had learned to do years ago. The markings on their clothing, the way they sat their horses, the calm in their posture. These were not men looking for trouble. That made it worse. The lead rider finally moved, guiding the horse forward a few steps, just enough to close the space without crossing it. The figure was tall, composed, wrapped in quiet authority that did not need to raise its voice. A woman. He saw that now. Her eyes did not go to him first. They went past him, straight to the rise behind the house where the fresh earth still held its shape against the wind. She studied it for a long second, then another, as if reading something written there that only she could understand. Ethan felt the weight of that look more than anything else that had happened so far. He lifted his hand slightly, not in defense, not in greeting, just enough to show what he held. The pendant rested against his palm, the leather cord hanging loose. The woman's gaze shifted, slow and precise, until it landed on the stone. Something changed in her expression, not sudden, not dramatic, just a tightening around the eyes that spoke of recognition. She brought her horse one step closer, then stopped again. When she finally spoke, her voice carried across the yard without effort, steady and clear, like it had been waiting for this moment longer than anyone else there. Where did you find that? It was not an accusation. It was not a question meant to trap him. It was something else entirely. Ethan did not answer right away. He let the silence sit between them, the way men do when they know the next words will matter more than the last 10 years combined. Then he nodded once, toward the grave behind him, simple, direct, no explanation. The woman followed the motion with her eyes, and this time, she did not look away quickly. She looked like someone who had just found what she had been searching for, and did not yet know if that was a good thing. Behind her, the line of riders remained still, not shifting, not reacting, as if they were waiting for something only she could decide. The wind moved again, stronger now, carrying the scent of dry earth and something older beneath it, something that did not belong to the present. Ethan felt it settle around him, that quiet understanding that whatever had come riding in with the dawn was not here by chance, and whatever he had buried the day before had not stayed buried in the way he thought it would. The woman's hand moved slightly, resting near the front of her saddle, not reaching for anything, just grounding herself in the moment. Her eyes lifted back to his, steady, searching, and for the first time since the riders appeared, Ethan felt something shift that he could not measure or name. Not danger. Not yet. Something heavier. Something that had been set in motion long before either of them stood where they were now. And then she spoke again, quieter this time, but somehow carrying even further. You buried him. The words did not echo. They settled, like dust finding its place after a long ride. And Ethan Cole felt them land heavier than any accusation could have. He did not look away from her. He did not shift his stance. He simply nodded once, the motion small but final, the kind of answer that did not ask for understanding. Someone had to, he said, his voice even, worn at the edges but steady enough to carry across the space between them. The woman studied him for a long moment, not judging, not rushing, just measuring something deeper than the words he had chosen. Behind her, the riders remained as they were, silent and unmoving, as if time itself had paused to wait for what came next. The sun had climbed a little higher now, casting longer lines of light across the yard, catching the edges of leather, the curve of reins, the faint shimmer of dust still hanging in the air. It should have felt like morning. It did not. The woman guided her horse forward another step, then another, closing the distance until she stood just inside the boundary of his land. The horse beneath her remained calm, its breathing slow, as if it understood this was not a moment for fear. Her eyes shifted once more toward the grave, then back to Ethan, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something new beneath it, not softer, but deeper, like it had reached into a place that had been waiting a long time to be heard. You buried him alone. It was not a question. Ethan gave the same answer, just as simple. Yes. The word hung there, and for a brief second, the wind dropped completely, leaving the air still enough that even the smallest movement felt loud. The woman's gaze moved to the pendant again, still resting in Ethan's open hand, the turquoise catching the light in a quiet, steady glow. She drew a slow breath, then extended her hand slightly, not reaching for it, but acknowledging it, the way one might acknowledge something sacred without touching it. That was his, she said. Ethan's fingers tightened just a fraction, not in refusal, not in defense, just a reflex he did not fully control. I found it on him, he replied. It did not seem right to leave it in the ground. The woman nodded once, a small motion that carried more weight than it should have. You were right, she said. Another silence followed, longer this time, stretching across the yard and into the line of riders behind her. One of the horses shifted its weight. Another lowered its head slightly. No one spoke. No one broke formation. It was as if every person there understood that whatever was being said now would shape everything that followed. Ethan let his gaze drift, just for a second, toward the grave again. The fresh earth had settled slightly since the night before, the edges softening, the cross standing alone against the open land. He had buried a man he thought he understood. Standing here now, he was no longer sure of that. He was not from your town, the woman said after a moment. They would not have claimed him. Ethan shook his head once. They did not. The woman's expression did not change, but something in her posture did, something subtle, like a decision settling into place. She drew her shoulders back slightly, her presence becoming more defined, more certain. His name was Daniel Reed, she said. The name landed differently than the others had, not loud, not sharp, but with a weight that seemed to reach backward through time. Ethan's jaw tightened just a fraction, almost unnoticeable, but enough to feel. He had known the name once, or something close to it. The woman continued, her voice steady, each word placed with care. He was not a drifter. He was not alone. Ethan did not respond right away. He let the words sit, let them find their place. Then he asked, quietly, then why was he out there by himself? The question did not carry challenge. It carried something closer to confusion, the kind a man feels when the pieces no longer fit the way they should. The woman held his gaze, and for the first time, there was something in her eyes that looked almost like hesitation, not weakness, not doubt, but the weight of what she was about to say. Because he chose to be, she answered. The wind returned, slow at first, brushing across the yard, lifting a thin layer of dust that moved between them like a quiet reminder that nothing here was truly still. Ethan shifted his weight slightly, the boards of the past pressing against the present in ways he had spent years trying to forget. People do not choose that kind of ending, he said. The woman tilted her head just slightly, studying him again, deeper this time, as if she were looking past the man in front of her and into the years behind him. Some do, she said, when there is something left undone. The words settled in a way that felt too precise to ignore. Ethan felt it then, that small, sharp edge of recognition that did not come from memory alone, but from something deeper, something that had been waiting beneath the surface for longer than he cared to admit. He looked at the pendant again, turning it once in his hand, the turquoise catching the light in a way that felt almost deliberate now. What was left? Undone, he asked. The woman did not answer right away. Instead, she looked past him once more, toward the grave, toward the man who had been placed there by hands that did not yet understand the full weight of what they had done. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, but it carried further than anything she had said before. You. The word did not strike like a blow. It settled, slow and certain, as if it had always been there waiting for him to hear it. And Ethan Cole felt something inside him shift in a way he had not allowed for years. He did not answer right away. He did not move. He simply stood there with the pendant in his hand and the morning stretching wider around him, the land too open for a man to hide from what had just been said. Me, he repeated, quieter now, not questioning her, but testing the weight of it for himself. The woman did not look away. You, she said again, and this time there was no hesitation in her voice, no space left for misunderstanding. The riders behind her remained still, but the silence among them changed, subtle, like a breath held just a moment longer than before. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, the memory rising before he could stop it, not sharp, not clear, but present enough to feel. He had spent years pushing those moments down, burying them deeper than any grave he had ever dug, telling himself that distance and time were enough to keep them there. Standing here now, he knew better. I do not know what you think he came for, Ethan said slowly, each word chosen with care. But whatever you believe is between me and that man, it ended a long time ago. The woman studied him again, longer this time, as if weighing not just his words, but the spaces between them. You are wrong, she said. Not harsh, not accusing, just certain. The wind moved again, lifting the edges of his coat, brushing across the ground where the dirt still looked too fresh against the rest of the land. Ethan let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding, his gaze drifting once more to the grave behind him. It looked smaller now in the full light of morning, less like an ending and more like a marker of something unfinished. He turned back to her. Then tell me, he said, what did not end? The woman did not answer right away. Instead, she guided her horse forward one more step, closing the distance until she stood just a few yards away from him, close enough that he could see the fine details in her expression, the lines that spoke of years carried with purpose, not regret. Her eyes held his, steady and unflinching, but there was something else there now, something that had not been present before. Not anger, not grief, something deeper. He carried this for a long time, she said, nodding slightly toward the pendant in his hand. Not as a memory, as a promise. Ethan looked down at the stone again, turning it slowly between his fingers. A promise to who? He asked. The woman's gaze shifted, not to the riders behind her, but to the land itself, as if the answer lived somewhere beyond both of them. To the man he could not face, she said. Ethan's grip tightened slightly, the leather cord pressing against his palm. If he wanted to face me, Ethan replied, he had years to do it. The woman nodded once, acknowledging the truth in that, but not yielding to it. He did, she said, more than once. Ethan's brow lowered just slightly, the first visible sign that something inside him was beginning to fracture. I never saw him, he said. No, she answered. You did not. The words hung there, simple, but layered with something that did not sit easy. Ethan felt it then, the shift from certainty into something less solid, less defined. Then how do you know? He asked, his voice quieter now, less guarded. The woman did not hesitate this time. Because I was with him, she said. The air seemed to narrow around them, the distance between past and present thinning in a way Ethan could not ignore. He came close, she continued, her voice steady, measured. But every time, he turned back. Ethan's gaze sharpened. Why? The woman held his eyes, and for the first time, there was a trace of something like understanding in her expression, not for the man buried in the ground, but for the one standing in front of her. Because he believed you deserved more than the truth would give you, she said. The statement settled in a way that made no immediate sense, and yet refused to be dismissed. Ethan shook his head slightly, not in denial, but in the slow resistance of a man who knows something is being placed before him that he is not ready to accept. That does not mean anything, he said. The woman tilted her head just a fraction, studying him again, as if she had expected that answer. It will, she said quietly. The wind passed between them again, stronger now, carrying the scent of dry earth and something older beneath it, something that had been waiting longer than either of them had realized. Ethan stood there, the pendant still in his hand, the grave behind him, the riders before him, and for the first time since they arrived, he did not feel like the one in control of what came next. He felt like a man standing in the middle of something that had already begun long before he chose to bury it, and was only now returning to finish what had been left undone. The silence did not break, it stretched, pulling tighter with every passing second, and Ethan Cole felt it settling into his bones the way a long winter does, slow and unavoidable. He turned the pendant again in his hand, the turquoise catching the light, but now it did not look like something he had found. It looked like something that had been waiting for him. You said he turned back, Ethan said, his voice quieter now, less certain than before. More than once. The woman nodded, her gaze steady, never leaving his. He rode within a mile of this place 3 winters ago, she said. Sat on a ridge where he could see your roof, your fence, the trail you take at sunrise. Ethan did not respond, but something in his posture shifted, almost invisible, like a memory brushing against the edge of recognition. He stayed there until the light was gone, she continued. Then he left. The wind moved again, carrying a faint chill that did not belong to the season, and Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, not at her, but at something forming behind her words. Why, he asked. The question came out slower this time, heavier, like it was no longer about the man in the ground, but about something deeper that had been left behind. The woman did not rush to answer. She let the space hold, let the quiet do its work, then said, because he believed if he came closer, he would take something from you that you had already paid for. Ethan's jaw tightened, the line of it hardening just enough to show. I paid nothing to him, he said. The woman tilted her head slightly, not disagreeing, but not accepting it either. That is not how he saw it, she replied. Ethan let out a slow breath, the kind that does not ease anything, only marks the passing of time. And what did he think he owed me, he asked. The woman's eyes moved, just briefly, to the grave behind him, then back. Not owed, she said. Undone. The words settled differently this time, not as a question, not as a challenge, but as something final. Ethan looked at the ground for a moment, then back at her. You keep saying that, he said, like it is something I am supposed to understand. The woman did not answer right away. Instead, she reached down slowly and rested her hand on the saddle horn, grounding herself in the moment before she spoke again. There was a night, she said, her voice softer now, but no less clear, when 2 men walked away from the same place with different stories. Ethan's eyes lifted, sharper now, the past pushing forward whether he wanted it or not. I remember that night, he said. The words came out before he could stop them, and once they were there, they did not leave. The woman studied him, and for the first time, there was something like recognition in her expression, not of the man he was now, but of the one he had been. You remember what you saw, she said. He remembered what he chose not to say. The difference hung between them, thin but unbreakable. Ethan felt it settle, that quiet crack in the certainty he had carried for years. I saw enough, he replied, though there was less conviction in it now. The woman shook her head slightly, not dismissing him, but guiding him somewhere he did not yet want to go. You saw the end, she said. He saw what came before. The wind shifted again, lifting dust in a slow spiral that moved across the yard and toward the grave, like something unseen was tracing a path that had already been walked. Ethan's gaze followed it for a second, then returned to her. Then say it, he said, his voice low, steady, but edged with something new. Say what he could not. The woman held his eyes, and this time, she did not look away at all. He told me, she said, that if the truth ever reached you, it would not come from him. Ethan's brow lowered slightly, confusion and something else mixing in a way that did not sit right. Then why come at all, he asked. The woman's answer came without hesitation. Because you buried him. The words landed again, but now they carried something different, something that connected the past to the present in a way Ethan could not ignore. You gave him what no one else would, she continued. A place to rest without judgment. Ethan said nothing. He could not. The simplicity of what he had done, something he had thought meant nothing more than basic decency, was now standing in front of him like it had opened a door he did not know existed. The riders behind her remained still, but the silence among them felt different now, less like waiting, more like witnessing. The woman leaned forward just slightly, her voice lowering, though it carried just as far. That is why we are here, she said. Ethan's gaze hardened just a fraction, not in defiance, but in the slow return of control. For what? He asked. The woman straightened, her posture firm again, her presence undeniable. To finish what he could not, she said. The wind stilled for a moment, as if the land itself was listening, and Ethan Cole stood there, the pendant in his hand, the grave behind him, and the weight of a truth that had not yet been spoken pressing closer than ever before. The words did not rush forward. They settled between them, slow and deliberate, and Ethan Cole felt the weight of them press into something he had spent years keeping buried deeper than any grave he had ever dug. He did not look away from her, but his grip on the pendant changed, tightening just enough to feel the edge of the stone against his palm. Finish what? He asked, his voice lower now, steadier on the surface, but carrying something underneath that had not been there before. The woman did not answer immediately. Instead, she let the silence stretch again, the kind of silence that forces a man to listen to everything he has been avoiding. The riders behind her remained still, but there was a shift now, subtle, like a breath passing through a line of men who understood that the moment had turned. The woman guided her horse one step closer, then stopped, the distance between them now close enough that no word needed to be raised. The truth, she said finally. Ethan's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in resistance, the kind that comes when a man knows something is about to be taken from him that he has built his life around. I already know the truth, he replied. The woman's eyes held his, steady, unyielding, and for the first time, there was a trace of something like sadness in them. No, she said quietly. You know the part that let you keep living. The wind moved again, brushing across the yard, lifting dust in thin lines that traced the ground between them, like something unseen was marking a boundary that had already been crossed. Ethan did not respond right away. He could feel it now, that slow fracture in the certainty he had carried for years, the memory pressing forward whether he wanted it or not. He looked past her for a moment, out across the open land, as if the distance might still offer him something solid to hold on to. It did not. When he looked back, his voice was quieter. Then say it, he said. The woman nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement that the moment had come. That night, she began, her voice steady, each word placed with care. You remember walking into the smoke, hearing your brother call out, seeing him fall. Ethan's breath slowed, his shoulders stiffening just slightly, the past rising now with a clarity he had not allowed himself to face. I remember enough, he said. The woman did not challenge him. She continued. You remember finding him on the ground, and you remember another man standing there. Ethan's eyes narrowed, the image sharpening in his mind, the shape of it familiar. The edges worn but still there. Yes, he said. The word came out firm, but it did not carry the same weight it once had. The woman's gaze did not waver. What you did not see, she said, was what happened before you arrived. The air seemed to thin, the distance between memory and truth narrowing with every word. Ethan felt it then, that small, sharp doubt that does not belong, but refuses to leave once it has taken hold. Then tell me, he said again, quieter now, the resistance giving way to something else. The woman drew a slow breath, her posture still, her presence unwavering. Your brother was not alone when the fire started, she said. He had already been pulled clear once. Ethan's brow tightened, confusion cutting through the certainty he had held for so long. By who? He asked. The answer came without hesitation. By the man you buried. The words landed clean, without force, but they carried further than anything she had said before. Ethan's fingers tightened around the pendant, the leather cord pressing into his skin, grounding him as the ground beneath his understanding began to shift. That is not what I saw, he said, but the words lacked the certainty they once had. The woman nodded slightly, as if she had expected that. You saw the moment after, she said. He went back when he did not have to. Ethan's breath caught. Just for a second, the image in his mind shifting, not fully, not yet, but enough to unsettle everything it had been built on. Why? He asked, his voice barely above a breath now. The woman's answer came softer than before, but it carried more weight than anything else. Because your brother asked him to, she said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something that had been waiting years to be heard. Ethan stood there, the pendant in his hand, the grave behind him, and for the first time, the story he had told himself no longer held together the way it used to, and he knew, without needing to be told, that what came next would not give him back the man he had been. The words did not fade after she spoke them. They stayed, echoing in a place Ethan Cole had kept closed for years, and for a moment, he did not feel the ground beneath his boots. He felt something else entirely, something shifting under everything he thought he knew. He did not speak right away. He could not. His eyes lowered, not in defeat, but in the slow process of a man trying to look at something he had spent a lifetime refusing to see. My brother would not have asked that, he said finally, his voice steady but quieter now, like it had lost something along the way. The woman did not argue. She did not press. She simply watched him, her gaze unwavering, allowing the truth to find its own weight. He did, she said, not louder, not sharper, just certain. Ethan shook his head slightly, a reflex more than a decision. You were not there, he replied. The woman's expression did not change, but her words came with a calm that did not need to defend itself. No, she said, but he was. The simplicity of it cut deeper than anything else she had said, not because it forced him to believe, but because it gave him no place to stand where his version of the past could remain untouched. The wind moved again, slower now, carrying the scent of dry grass and something older, something that felt like memory itself rising from the ground. Ethan's grip on the pendant loosened slightly, the stone resting against his palm as if it had always belonged there. He went back, Ethan said, almost to himself, the words forming as the image in his mind shifted, not fully, but enough to fracture the shape he had carried for so long. The woman nodded once. He went back, she repeated, not for himself. The silence that followed stretched wider than before, pulling Ethan deeper into the space between what he remembered and what he was now being told. He lifted his eyes again, meeting hers, searching for something that might steady him. Then why did he not say it? He asked. Why carry that for years and never speak it? The woman drew a slow breath, her gaze softening just slightly, not in pity, but in understanding of something that did not need to be explained twice. Because he believed you would not hear it, she said. Ethan's jaw tightened again, but this time it was not resistance. It was something closer to realization, the kind that comes too late to change anything that has already been done. So he let me believe, Ethan said, the words heavy now, each one carrying more than the last. The woman did not interrupt. He let me carry it, Ethan continued, his voice lower, steadier, but edged with something that had not been there before. The woman nodded once. He believed it was the only way you could live with what was left, she said. Ethan let out a breath, long and slow, the kind that does not release anything, only marks the moment when something inside a man begins to settle into place whether he wants it to or not. His gaze drifted again to the grave behind him, the fresh earth now looking different, not just a place where a man had been laid to rest, but something else entirely, something that had carried a truth across years and miles just to reach this moment. And now, Ethan said, turning back to her, you have brought it here. The woman held his gaze, steady as before. No, she said quietly. You did. The words landed with a weight that did not need force. Ethan felt it then, clear and undeniable. He had made the choice to bury the man when no one else would. He had taken the pendant instead of leaving it behind. He had stayed when he could have walked away. Every step had led here. If I had left him out there, Ethan said slowly, none of this would have followed. The woman shook her head slightly, not in disagreement, but in correction. It would have, she said, just not like this. Ethan's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in thought, the kind that moves slower now, more careful. Then why come at all? He asked again, the question deeper this time, no longer about the man in the ground, but about the people standing before him. The woman's answer came without hesitation. Because he could not leave without it being known, she said. Not after everything he carried. Ethan stood there, the pendant in his hand, the riders before him, and the grave behind him, and for the first time since they arrived, he did not feel like he was being judged. He felt like he was being shown something. Something that had always been there, just beyond what he had allowed himself to see. The woman leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering just enough to draw the moment closer. There is more, she said. Ethan did not ask what. He already knew that whatever came next would not make this easier. The wind stilled again, the land holding its breath, and Ethan Cole stood at the edge of a truth that had waited too long to be buried. The words lingered after she said them, not fading, not softening, but settling into the space between them like something that had finally found where it belonged. And Ethan Cole felt it in the way his breathing changed, slower now, heavier, as if each breath had to move through something thicker than air. He did not look away this time. He did not try to push it down. He simply stood there and waited. The woman studied him for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried something different, not just truth, but the weight of what came after it. He did not come to you only for what happened that night, she said. Ethan's brow lowered slightly, not in confusion, but in the quiet strain of a man trying to hold on to what was left of his understanding. Then why, he asked. The question came out steadier than he felt, but it held. The woman shifted slightly in her saddle, her posture still composed, but her gaze drifting for a brief second toward the horizon, as if the answer stretched farther than this place alone. Because of what came after, she said. The wind moved again, brushing across the land, lifting dust in thin lines that traced the edges of the yard, the grave, the distance between them. Ethan waited. He did not interrupt. He had learned that much now. After that night, she continued, your brother was not the only one who carried what happened. Ethan's eyes sharpened, the words pulling something forward that he had not yet touched. What do you mean? He asked. The woman looked back at him, steady again. He did not leave that place the way you believed, she said. He stayed longer than you knew. The air seemed to narrow again, the edges of the moment tightening. Ethan felt it, that small shift that told him something else was about to be taken from him. Stayed. For what? He asked. The woman did not hesitate this time. To make sure you made it out, she said. The words landed without force, but they carried further than anything before them. Ethan's hand tightened around the pendant, the leather cord pressing into his palm again, grounding him as the shape of the past shifted once more. I made it out on my own, he said, but the words did not carry the same certainty. The woman shook her head slightly, not dismissing him, but guiding him again. You think you did, she said. Ethan did not respond right away. He felt the memory pressing closer now, not just the image of his brother, not just the man he had blamed, but the space around it, the parts he had never looked at closely enough. He stayed, she continued, until he knew the path was clear. Ethan's gaze drifted again, not to her this time, but to the ground, to the faint lines in the dust that the wind had drawn and erased again and again. Why would he do that? Ethan asked, quieter now. The woman's answer came softer, but it held more weight than before. Because he had already taken something from you, she said. Ethan's jaw tightened, not in resistance, but in the slow recognition of something he had never allowed himself to consider. And he believed, she continued, that the only way to carry that was to give you something back. The silence that followed was different now. It was no longer empty. It was full of something that had been missing, something that was settling into place whether Ethan wanted it to or not. He lifted his eyes again, meeting hers, searching not for denial, but for something that could hold this new shape of the truth. So he came here, Ethan said slowly, to tell me that. The woman shook her head once. No, she said. He came here to see if you had already become the man he hoped you would be. The words settled in a way that did not need explanation. Ethan felt it then, clear and unavoidable. The choice he had made the day before, to bury a man no one claimed, to take the pendant instead of leaving it behind, to give dignity where there was none, had not been a small thing. It had been an answer. The woman leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering, but carrying just as far. When you buried him, she said, you gave him that answer. Ethan looked down at the pendant again, the turquoise steady in his hand, no longer just an object, but something that connected everything that had been said. And now, he asked, his voice quieter, steadier, What happens? The woman held his gaze, and for the first time, there was no weight of judgment in it at all. Now, she said, we do what he asked of us. The wind stilled again, the land holding its breath, and behind her, the riders shifted for the first time, not in threat, not in tension, but in purpose, as if something long carried had finally reached its place, and Ethan Cole stood there, no longer at the edge of the past, but inside it, waiting for what would come next. The shift came without sound, without warning, but Ethan Cole felt it as clearly as if the ground itself had moved beneath him, and for the first time since the riders arrived, he understood that whatever was about to happen was not meant to break him, but to complete something that had been waiting far too long. The woman held his gaze for a moment longer, then turned her head slightly, not toward him, but toward the grave behind the house, and that small movement was enough to change everything. The riders behind her moved at once, not in a rush, not in force, but in quiet agreement, each one dismounting with the same measured calm, boots meeting the dust without a sound that could be called harsh. No one reached for a weapon. No one raised a voice. They walked forward slowly, forming a line that curved toward the fresh mound of earth, their presence filling the space not with tension, but with something heavier, something closer to respect. Ethan did not step back. He did not step forward. He stood where he was, the pendant still in his hand, watching as they passed him one by one, each figure moving with purpose that did not need explanation. The woman dismounted last. When her boots touched the ground, she did not look at Ethan again right away. She walked toward the grave, stopping a few feet from the wooden cross, her posture straight, her hands resting at her sides, not in ceremony, not in ritual that Ethan recognized, but in something quieter, something that belonged to a place deeper than words. The others formed behind her, a wide arc of stillness, each one facing the same point, the same piece of earth that now held a man whose story had not ended the way anyone believed. The wind moved once, then stilled again, as if the land itself had chosen to listen. Ethan felt it in his chest, that strange, steady quiet that comes when something unresolved begins to settle, not fully, not yet, but enough to be felt. The woman reached into the fold of her clothing and drew out something small, wrapped in a strip of worn fabric. She knelt then, slowly, deliberately, placing it at the base of the cross without ceremony, without announcement. The gesture was simple. It did not need more. Ethan watched it happen, his eyes narrowing slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus, trying to understand the meaning carried in such a small act. One by one, the others followed, each stepping forward, each placing something of their own beside the first. A stone, a strip of leather, a small carved piece of wood. Nothing of great value. Nothing meant to be seen from a distance. Only things that carried weight for the ones who brought them. Ethan felt the space around him shift again, not tightening, not closing, but opening in a way he had not expected. This was not about judgment. It was not about debt. It was something else entirely. When the last of them stepped back, the woman remained where she was, still kneeling, her gaze fixed on the ground before her. For a long moment, no one moved. Then she spoke, not loudly, not for anyone beyond that circle, but the words carried just the same. He asked for this, she said. Ethan did not interrupt. He did not ask. He listened. Not forgiveness, she continued. Not anything that could be given by another man. She lifted her head slightly, her eyes moving once more to Ethan, steady, clear, only to be remembered as he truly was. The words settled, final in a way that did not need to be repeated. Ethan felt something loosen inside him, not release, not relief, but a shift in the weight he had carried, like it no longer belonged only to him. He looked down at the pendant in his hand, then back at the grave, then at the line of people who had come not to take anything, but to leave something behind. Slowly, without speaking, he stepped forward. The movement was small, but it carried him into the space they had formed, into something he had not been part of until now. He knelt beside the cross, the dust settling around his knees, and for a moment, he did nothing at all. Then he placed the pendant down among the others, the turquoise catching the light one last time before resting still. No one spoke. No one needed to. The woman rose slowly, her gaze resting on Ethan for just a second longer, not searching, not measuring, just acknowledging. Then she turned, and the others followed, mounting their horses in the same quiet way they had dismounted. Within minutes, they were moving again, not hurried, not looking back, the line of riders stretching toward the horizon as the morning fully claimed the land. Ethan remained where he was, kneeling beside the grave, the wind returning in a slow, steady breath that carried dust across the ground and over the small offerings left behind. He did not reach for the pendant again. He did not call out. He simply stayed there, watching as the figures in the distance grew smaller until they became part of the land itself. And in the silence that followed, heavier than anything that had come before, Ethan Cole understood something he had not known the day before, not when he lifted the body, not when he dug the grave, not even when the riders first appeared. Some truths do not come to be told. They come to be carried. And some men do not return for justice. They return to make sure the right man learns how to live with it.